Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Asad Lalji. Welcome to our Avid Online live session. Please refer to the chat box for more information about our partners for this evening's discussion. Avid Online was launched on the 1st of April 2020 in a direct response to the pandemic. So now we're 19 months young and over 280 programs later, we continue to champion and bring to our audiences the very best of the arts and culture, staying true to our mantra, as always, that learning never stops. Since we've not been able to welcome you into the Royal Opera House, Mumbai, physically since the pandemic, which is soon to reopen, we have been curating and presenting programs across the breadth of the performing arts through Avid Online. Interestingly, today marks our 5th-year anniversary of the Royal Opera House, Mumbai, since it reopened to the public after a long hiatus of 25 years. The last 5 years has been challenging, but at the same time, extremely rewarding, having curated many performances, art shows, exhibitions, festivals at the venue. Then moving on to the virtual space when the pandemic hit us, forcing us to shut our doors once again, but reopened it in a virtual avatar. Leveraging our platform to offer the best of the performing arts to our patrons, followers, in the comfort of their homes from around the world, all while supporting various causes to uplift and empower the lives of artists and all those who have been affected by the pandemic. We took the rich performing arts legacy and heritage of the Royal Opera House Mumbai online to resonate with, and by extension, create a new wave of younger audiences. And there's no better way to celebrate our 5th anniversary by exploring a topic so close to our hearts, followed by a live virtual performance at the end. Music has always been the soul of our curatorial philosophy, and tonight we present the next edition of the lecture demonstration series across cultures with our partners, the Indian Music Experience Museum, the Alliance Francaise, Furtado's, and the Royal Opera House, Mumbai. This series looks at the different paradigms of extraordinary exchanges of culture and tradition, where we try to answer the question: is fusion a scaffolding built to support the existing structure of the art in a way of glorifying it, or is it a framework crafted to dilute? The first session of the series, Ragas in the Western Consciousness, explored the canvas of creating fusion music and examined the challenges and the potential of these cross-disciplinary blends. The speakers spoke about their genre-defying work on blending Indian classical music and Western music. But this brings me to the second edition of our evening series, Across Cultures, Fusing Identities Through Art. The second edition of the ongoing lecture demonstration series that aims to examine the influence and the potential of blending disparate art forms to create new, artistically curated, holistic experiences. Allow me to introduce our evening speakers. Author and director of Le Douze Amis and Drupad exponent Zulbahar Sylvian Watman, who will be in conversation and be moderating this conversation with lute player Jean-Luc Tombe and Indian Kathak dancer and actor Maitri Mahatma. Our fourth panelist, French Baroque actor Emmanuel Weber, could not join us, unfortunately. For more about each of our speakers, please refer to the extremely impressive bios that have been posted in the chat section. The speakers will dwell into their work of Les Douze Amis, Two Friends, a French play stages the imaginary meeting of French fable writer La Fontaine with Pilpai, the legendary author of the Indian Panchatantra, embodied by a French Baroque actor, an Indian Kathak dancer holding a dialogue through fables. The play is quintessential, an exploration between space, between the mudras and Baroque gestures, the space between Baroque music and Indian alaps, a meeting of cultures, costumes, ideas, performances, and art forms for India and France. Please note the session will last 90 minutes, including a Q&A, so please keep your questions posted throughout, followed by a performance. So do stay on for that. On that note, over to you, Sylvia. Thank you for tuning in and look forward to a fascinating session. Thank you.
Thanks, Asad, for your introduction. Hi, everybody. We are happy to share views and some art on the theme of the meeting and dialogue of our cultures. Since the theme is generally about music, we'll start talking about that and the phenomenon of fusion. And after that, we'll talk about performing arts and our experience in Les Deux Amis, the play in English would translate as The Two Friends, since we three this evening are part of the team on this show. So first of all, I would like to take us back in history and think of what has happened in many places and times in terms of fusion, in terms of musical genres that have met and fused. And the first example that comes to me is Spain of Middle Ages, because in the Middle Ages, three distinct communities lived together in Spain for centuries. There was the Muslim, there was the Christian, and also the Jewish communities living together. And that gave rise to some music that we can truly term as fused, in the sense that it's a new autonomous style. And first remark is they had this factor. They had time to meet, to know each other, to hear each other's music and feel how that influences them. And if we think of styles that have fused, music that have fused more recently, I would think of blues and jazz that do fuse some African influence with Western, European influences to make these new American styles. And as a hello to you in India, I'd like to share a special example, which is called Jazz Manouche. It's a kind of jazz that was created in France in the 1930s, and it fuses some gypsy influence, some influence of French popular music of that time, and the jazz style that was coming into Europe in those years. And you will maybe recognize this word manouche as very near Indian languages. Well, the thing is that this word Manushya means human in Hindi, and in the language of the Manush people of this community, it simply means a member of their community. The reason is very simply that the Gypsy people originate from India, from Western India in particular, Rajasthan and Sindh for this community. And this is why they still have their name as a word you can trace to Sanskrit and to Manu, the first human being in the Indian mythology. So Sagarji, if you could please play this example of Django Reinhardt, who is the father of Manouche music. So if you look for this music in English, it is called deep sea jazz. So now let's focus back on the meeting of India and Western genres. And what we know is that in the 1960s, it was quite a phenomenon with Ravi Shankar, also the Dagar brothers who came to Europe in the early 60s. And it was really a phenomenon the way Western culture responded to that new music. It is said, cannot verify, but it's said when the composer Nadia Boulanger heard the Dagar brothers sing, at the end of the performance, she would have said, "But we've been wrong all this time. This was music." So can't verify, but it's quite impressive in the mouth of a composer. And then Ravi Shankar, you know, he charmed the greatest musicians. He played with Yehudi Menuhin. He taught the giant of jazz, John Coltrane, so that John Coltrane gave his own son the name Ravi after Ravi Shankar. Ravi Shankar composed for Jean-Pierre Rampal, for Mstislav Stropovich. It's very impressive. And after him, many others have come from India and many experiences have been made. And what we can say is that there is a great desire to meet and combine. So I was thinking, how is it that we have this great desire? And I think from the Western side, when we hear Indian music, it's very impressive because it's. I think the special genius of India is that India is able to keep ancient art forms fresh as if they were created new this morning. And you know, when we listen to some Indian music for the first time or see a performance of Indian dance, it's like time has not passed. We are in eternity, and eternal time is still there. And so it's a feeling of going back to something essential and to some origin. The fact that it's both classical and improvised is also quite attractive. From the Indian side, I believe opening up from a traditional framework to meet other genres and maybe feel part of something like a world movement is very attractive. So apart from that attraction, we also see that there is resistance in the classical community in India, resistance to fusion. And I think it can be very well understood from the fact that in an oral tradition, when very precious styles are handed down from master to disciple in an unbroken chain, you would want to keep these forms in their purity, because there is nothing to do to better a form. For instance, like an alap, you cannot better alap. You can dive into it. There can be thousands of musicians that jump into alap and experiment and explore for a full life, and you would say many lives, but you cannot better that. And moreover, these forms are so precious in a world where we have so much information, we are bombarded. These music styles from India, they can give us the feeling of eternity, of being like a drop in the ocean, of belonging to a great whole. And this is just priceless. So this conservatism from the Indian classical community is completely understandable and legitimate. On the other side, the fact of meeting is also legitimate when in every city, in every megapole of the world today, in every building, you have people from so many cultures living together. If we don't meet each other and try to know each other, then there is something which is not sound. So the meeting is also natural and completely a natural phenomenon and necessary. So I would say that these two forces, which I would call on one hand conservatism, and on the other hand the fact of opening and sharing, which I would call liberalism in a cultural sense, they both are necessary. And not only that, but they combine to create any form of living art. There is nothing that is completely closed and conservative. There is nothing that is fully open and without any rules. So they combine to create any live form of art. And I would say they also combine to create life in general. And now I'd like to take an example, a comparison to compare the meeting of musical styles. And it's very simple. I think we can compare it to the meeting of people. You know, there are so many kinds of meeting. You can have superficial meeting, not go into details. You can also give a facade to each other and show the other what the other wants to see. That's more seduction. And you can also learn who the other is and really see how the other is enriching you and the other person is impacting you. And this spectrum is happening in the meeting in music also. And I would like to take the image one step further and say that when music really fuse and create a new autonomous style, it's like two people who form a couple and have a child. And in the child, you can recognize, you know, maybe the nose of his father, the eyes of his mother, and the cultural traits from his parents. But the child is a completely autonomous new being. And that also happens to create new kinds of music. Now, I'll share my personal view on the meeting of Indian and Western musics. I would feel that we are at the stage of a dialogue. That is, we are learning from each other. We have like a magnetic field between the two of the cultures and taking information from one to the other. Some meetings are also, you know, very fast, and there is so much attraction, desire to fuse that we do. It's little like, you know, if you allow me, it's like one night stand. This also happens. You put musicians together, and the second evening they give a concert. But there are also some more careful ways of meeting and being in dialogue, and I think this is where we are. And I like to define this way, because if we say we are fused, it's like we are like that. There is no further way to go. If we say we are in a dialogue, there is a magnetic field between us, and there is so much to learn from each other. And I think this is what we are at. And there is a long and beautiful way to go further in art and to learn about each other. And I would like to stop on that idea and propose that we listen to some little music together, which I will very briefly comment. And I propose we each see how we feel listening to that. And I will leave it open after. So Sagarji, if you could please give us Beethoven. This is Beethoven's Fourth Concerto, second movement, played by Christian Zimmermann on piano, and the Orchestra of Vienna, directed by Leonard Bernstein in 1989. Thank you. Very touching music. I'll just share this, that here we have one piano player who is alone in dialogue with a whole stringed orchestra. It's like a forest of stringed instruments that he's speaking with. And he's very fluid. His melody is fluid, accompanied by chords, by harmony. And the orchestra has no harmony. It's in unison and it's turned, ta-tan, ta-tan. And so there is great tension and contrast between these two, this lonely piano and this orchestra. And it's like one man facing the whole world. And of course, it's something that we can understand in parallel to the thought of that time, 19th century in Europe, the time of revolutions of the people. And it bespeaks of the worth of the individual. It's something about individuality and the noble quality of individual feelings, I think. So Sagar, can we listen now to Ustad Ji? Now we'll listen to the beginning of Alap on Rag Pancham Khons by Ustad Zia Mohiuddin Dagar, who plays Rudra Veena in Drupad style. It's a recording made in France in 1984. Yes, may Ustad and Beethoven forgive us for cutting short their improvisation and their music for the sake of this moment together. And here there is no world anymore. There is no individual facing a world. This is gone. It's more like jumping in an ocean. We have one line of melody from the Veena that comes, then goes, then comes back on the background of the sound of the Tampura, and it's more like a wave rising from the ocean and going back to that ocean, like the same water as the ocean, jutting out and then coming back and jutting out. And we feel actually that there's no end. We have to end the performance for practical reasons, but it's like we have jumped into eternity. So it's not really like something about personal human feelings. It's like the voice is part of a great whole. Yeah. And with that, I'm happy to ask Jean-Luc if he would share his thoughts with us as a beautiful musician of ancient music and also musicologist. And Jean-Luc, if you can, it would be nice if you can tell what you were telling me yesterday evening about your family in Pondicherry and how music of Mozart and Beethoven came to them and impacted them.
Yes, in fact, we have this conversation yesterday about music and identities, individual conscious. Um, and it reminded me of my father. And my father told me the first time he heard Beethoven's music in Pondicherry. It was in the late 40s, I believe. And people of my family would gather in a house with a very bad, I think, bad gramophone or something like this to hear music, and it was like a earthquake for them. It was something very moving. They have never imagined that music could create this. And so I think that this was really produced a change within their soul. And my grandmother was even older. She told me she was playing Carnatic violin when she was a young girl. She was 16 or 15, and one day she had a French violin teacher, and she began to play Mozart music, and it was also for her something very very important and a way of discovering new feelings, new ways of interpreting the reality. So um, this is really important that we have in this story that Sida was speaking about what Indian music means to Western people, and I was speaking of what Western music could have meant years ago for Indian people. So I like to just to speak about one thing with Les Deux Amis, which make this adventure, because I cannot say it's a concert, it's not a show, it's a kind of story, collective story. Why is this story so important for me? I think it reflects something very very deep in our time. It's that identities are complex. At the beginning of this meeting, I think it was offline. You asked me my name. How do you pronounce it? Is it Tambi or Tambi? And I could not say because it's both Tambi because it's a Tamil name. I'm French and I was born in France. I don't speak Tamil. I always pronounce my name Tambi. But when you asked me, I couldn't say what was the right pronunciation. And this adventure, Deux Amis, is a kind of diasporic adventure because people with complex identities and complex relations with India and the West are involved in this art creation. I mean, Sylvain is French, but he knows India better than I know. Maitri is Indian, and Namanko, her husband, also is Indian, but they are a very precious part of French culture today. I mean, French culture would not be the same if they would not be in France today. They are very, very precious for us, for all they do. For this culture, French culture, it's not part of India, it's just French nowadays. People like Maitri and Damancourt are just creating what is the richness of French culture. And me, I am also, of course, very French. I don't speak any Indian languages, but one part of my heart is deeply in India. And so the deux amis allowed me to have a kind of contact with my own roots, with Hinduism, with many things that are very important for me. So that's why this show is so important. And this leads me to perhaps to react to what Sylvain was saying about the two forces that are involved in humanity. You know, Claude Lévi-Strauss in Race et Histoire, which is a marvelous book, tells us that at the beginning, humanity was united, Homo sapiens. There was only one, it was a kind of small tribe, and they were scattered all around the world. And so there is a kind of force that try to push us to reunite, and there is also a force that push us to affirm our own identities. And so these two forces are always at work. Whatever we do, we tend to be perhaps to want to look like the others, and we want also to be very singular. And these two forces are also in the deux amis. These forces could be conflict, it could be failure, but it's not in our case. And so, I mean, the fact that we try to conciliate the two tendencies of humanity, of human being, its identity has two meanings. It is identical. We say two things are identical, or my identity card only tells what I am alone. So there are two meanings of identities, as Paul Ricoeur has put it. And so we have in the design, we tried to just deal with these two tendencies of human soul. And it reminds me of Edouard Glissant, French philosopher, who says that mixing things together should be what he calls correlations. And correlation it's a kind of utopia. It's, perhaps we never match it, but in correlation, things that are fused must be equal. You can't make a correlation or fusion with things with inequality. You have to have respect for the other, and more than respect, love. I mean, you have to be. I think that Manuel Weber is amazed by what is Katak. I've seen his eyes when he discovered. He was amazed, and I think Maite also was very interested in Manuel's gesture, and it was the same for music. I mean, with Damancourt, in the tabla, I was always looking at my instrument, and for me, tabla is just a dream. So you have to have this thing, this mutual admiration, and at the same time, all must be unpredictable. It's not a calculation of things. Just like some record company could do. We're going to put a little bit Indian music rhythm, Indian rhythm, and some Western sounds, and it's going to be a good deal. I mean, this kind of fusion has to be very, very honest and happen what can happen. I mean, with Maitri and Manuel, something happened that was very mysterious, quite magical. All this, of course, it's not. Sylvain has created a frame for things to happen, but he has not predicted what would happen. The thing that happened was in the art, not in theories or not in concept. It was much more magnetic. So that's what was our this adventure of the Zami. And the last thing I would like to say is, but perhaps that this adventure of the Zami means more than art, more than only culture. It's because it tends to show a third way for globalization. We can preserve all the cultures, and keep home. Everybody can keep home, or we can also lose identities and become just like a mix of American and all culture. That would be a uniformization of the world. Or we can, as Sylvain said, dialogue. We can have dialogue, and the deux amis create dialogue between Europe and the old civilization, or all the heritage of Europe, and India, as kind of another model for globalization. That could be, it's of course, it's immodest what I said. Our little show, our little get 4%. I don't mean that we can change the world, but one drop of it in the world can change a drop of something. So that's just what I wanted to say.
Great, Tony. So now we are talking about the show, which is second part, talking about this show, which is dialogue of cultures in performing arts. And it's absolutely correct that these two forces are at play also in that show. So perhaps that's the first thing I would share. So as an author, I brought a framework of fables and some ideas of how a dialogue can happen, but proposals came from every artist, and valuable proposals came from every artist that were unexpected, and that brought life to the show. So my difficulty as directing this play was actually to keep in one hand the framework and be conservative enough, and to be liberal enough in the other hand to accept the proposals from each member of the team. And I believe that because of that, the show is alive. And so that has been my difficulty. And now I would like to share very simple ideas about this show. First, it's a show about fables and about the influence of the Panchatantra fables from India on the fables of Jean de La Fontaine, which are stories which are known to every child in France. But the influence of India is hardly ever known. Now there is another thing, which is that in India itself, people hardly know the international success of the Panchatantra stories. These stories have traveled outside of India from Middle Ages, and there are versions everywhere in the Middle East, in Ethiopia, I believe in Tibet also, and everywhere in Europe. So if you imagine these Panchatantra stories being learned by kids in many, many languages, this is not just an abstract vision. It really happened and is happening. And so this is the theme. The theme is the influence of the Indian fables of Jean de La Fontaine, who does acknowledge that influence in writing in the foreword of his 7th book of fables. And so now the stories themselves, which are chosen, they are about meetings of two figures, often two animals, and goes from, an animal eating up another one to a love story. And first word I would take to describe the show and how we give a feeling of dialogue is similarities or nearness. So on the one hand, you have Panchatantra. On the other hand, you have the French fables, Panchatantra translated into French in 17th century. So from the point of view of literature, it's so near that after some time in the show, you don't know what is a French fable, you don't know what is an Indian fable, or for that matter, Persian fable, because the translation we use is a Persian translation of a translation of Panchatantra. And second parallel is gestures. Now you have Kathak on one hand with mudras, and on the other hand, you have a Baroque actor, Manuel Weber, and he uses gestures and a gesture language that was used in the Baroque time, which is this is 17th century in Europe. the Baroque time. And so visually, the audience sees like a dialogue of two styles of gestures. And I believe Maitreyi will tell us more about that shortly. And then thirdly, you have the musics that are used, that is Baroque music played by Jean-Luc, and music on the sitar, which I play. And in order to have enough nearness, the choice we made of pieces played on the theorbo by Jean-Luc are like this. There is one piece called Musette played 3 times, and this piece has a refrain which has only 2 chords. So it's first chord and going to the second, going back to the first, going back to the second like a swing. So this simplicity of harmony can be in dialogue with the music which has a drone, that is an incorporated tempura in the form of cicari in the sitar. And there is a second piece which is Carnarius, which has three chords, and also it's repetitive, repeating these 3 chords, and it's also a small number of chords. So in that way, there are enough similarities to be able to be in dialogue. We don't feel like it's completely foreign planets. And the second word that comes is differences. So from the beginning of the show, which we are going to see shortly in video, you see a Baroque actor with his costume, with his gestures, and with the music accompanying him, that's Baroque. And on the other hand, you see a Kathak dancer who has also her own dress, gestures, body language, and accompanying instruments with tabla and sitar. So this comes very clearly in the mind of the audience. And then when we have set this magnetic field, then we can play, we can interact, we can even merge and unmerge, we can have all kinds of combinations. Then the differences in music, to speak about music, the possibility of modulation that there is in Baroque music is interesting in following a storyline, and it can help to give impressions of surprise, of an opening into a new world, because theater thrives on contrasts and surprises. On the other hand, the sitar is very good at setting an atmosphere, like a once upon a time atmosphere. The stories we have don't start with once upon a time, but these are also tales. These are also animal stories. And the sitar gives an atmosphere, and the supple structure of both prelude, Baroque prelude, as well as alap, they allow us to follow the storylines. And then the tabla gives the whole show, it gives grounding. And Nabankur is a very creative player who gave us many propositions, and he can do surprise effects that the sitar basically can't do. So now, if Sagar, you could kindly show us the first video of the 2 friends, which is the very beginning, and the words in the mouth of the actor, Manuel Weber, are the words of La Fontaine himself, acknowledging his debt to Indian fables. The 2 figures of the actor and the Kathak dancer represent La Fontaine and Pilpay, the legendary author, as the name came to be known in Middle East and Europe. So if it's possible, yes.
J'ai jugé à propos de donner à la plupart de mes dernières fables un air et un tour un peu différents de celui que j'avais donné aux premières. je ne tiens pas qu'il soit ici nécessaire d'en étaler les raisons. Seulement, je dirais par reconnaissance que j'en dois la plus grande partie à Pilpaï, sage indien. Son livre a été traduit dans toutes les langues. Les gens du pays le croient fort ancien et original à l'égard d'Ésope, si ce n'est Ésope lui-même. La laitière et le pot au lait.
Yes, just to know the beginning of that fable we saw, the milkmaid and the milk pot. It's a version that came to Europe from Middle Ages and was popular, and it comes from a Panchatantra story called the Brahmin and the flower pot. So now I would like my friends and colleagues to take it up. Jean-Luc, would you add something to do you have some comments on the two friends you would like to do?
Not yet. Nothing comes to my mind, but perhaps later.
Okay. And then Maitri, I think Maitri has something to tell us about gestures, and I leave it to you, please.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. So first and foremost, I wish to thank Azad Lalji and the whole team of Avid Learning, and of course, along with Sylvain, for having invited me to share my views today. I shall be looking at it from the point of view of dance, body language, gesture, and space. So as Sylvain and also Jean-Luc just mentioned, fusion is basically, and to me, according to my point of view, fusion is a delicate balance between two forces. On one hand, we have this desire of preserving tradition, and on the other hand, we have this urge for adventure, this urge to break through boundaries, to go to meet other forms of arts. So, and this is what an artist has to juggle with both these longings and both these wishes, you know. So, of course, in particular with this venture, I gave in to the call of adventure, and I wanted to go to meet out other forms of art, such as the théâtre, the Baroque music, and of course the Baroque acting, the comedy, you know, those styles. So first, when Sylvain proposed this project to me as a dancer, what I first tried to do is to look for bridges. So when we try and dialogue between two different art forms, I think from the point of view of artists, all artists try to find a kind of bridge, which are the bridging points through which I can meet this form of art. So as for me, I found three bridging points between Kathak and Baroque comedy. So to cut it short, Kathak, the world of Kathak can be actually summed up into three different aspects. So we have the dance aspect, we have the rhythmic aspect, and we have the theatrical aspect. So thinking about Baroque comedy, what came to my mind was that the theatrical aspect was something with which we could find a dialogue, through which we could find a dialogue. And as I studied more into it and I looked more into this art form, what I found out to my surprise, maybe it's not a surprise for Sylvain and some others, but probably for Indians, also a lot of Indians who know Indian classical forms of dance, where we use, mudras. But I didn't know this, and I found out that in Baroque form of theater, they also have given a thought to these mudras. They don't call it mudras, of course. To them, it's gestures. So I have prepared a little diaporama for you so that you can compare the mudras. In the Indian system, we have the mudras are separated into one hand gestures and the two hand gestures. So thank you, Saga, for sharing the diaporama. And so above you see the single-handed gestures, mudras, and the double-handed gestures in Indian dance. And below you find all the gestures used by the Baroque music. So that's incredible. And I think that itself is an immense bridging point between these two art forms, that we have that urge of, expressing ourselves or searching, or looking into the ways we can use the hand to depict or to narrate something. The second point in common with Baroque, of course, was the theatrical aspect. And so the whole question of expressions, which in the Indian system is known as rasa. So those who are familiar with the Indian classical art forms, especially the dance, you know that we have 9 rasas known as the Nava rasas. So, hasya, karun, so joy, sorrow. But what is very interesting, and I found also a book, I couldn't share the book, all of the book with you today, but I have just taken, Saga, could you please give us the second diagram? Yeah, thank you. So as you can see on this diagram, on the left, on top, you have the whole book written about all the passions, they call it passions, in the Baroque system. So they have enumerated various passions like joy, sorrow, and we have a lot in common also with the Navarasas. So this was a very interesting point. And of course, from the Indian system, we have the Natya Shastra, which states the Navarasa on the right side. You can see it. So if you have questions, we could come to it later on. So right now I wish to continue. And the third point, which I found was in common with Baroque theater, I really miss Manuel today, because I wish he was there to explain this to you. He would have explained better, but I'll do my best. There's this concept called contrapposto in the Baroque form of art. And contrapposto is actually in the posturing of the Baroque theater, they have a tension between two parts of their body. And so it's never standing straight, for Indians, maybe it's a little like the Odyssey where you have the tribhang. So the two parts of the body, two parts are in different angles, So basically this tension symbolizes for them an opposition between the heart and the mind, between science and religion, etc. So these oppositions which we live with is actually taken in the body by the Baroque actor. And I feel that a common point with this in the Kathak form of dance is what we call the sum, because while we are performing an artist in the movements, we have a whole lot of study to be able to connect to the people, to be able to hold the audience. So, connect with the eyes, the hand, how I take my hand, etc. So the whole dance, during the performance, during a sequence, fast moving sequence, a dancer learns how to actually connect to the audience. But there's this one point called the sum, which is the first beat of a rhythm cycle, for those who know, or for those who don't know it, it's a point where the dancer actually suspends all movements and we just freeze. And that sum is, I think, the point, connecting point with Baroque, where, you know, they're like trying to go for that opposition between here and now, and this point we connect to something else. I'm no more with you. So these were very interesting points for me, and I wish to, through this project, to look into it. But of course, even when you find bridging points, an artist is always hesitant. And I admit that I was always very hesitant about venturing out in this project. And I was a little skeptic also, you know, because basically sharing space is a very delicate matter, I think. You are actually allowing someone to enter your intimacy, to enter inside your dream space. And that is what worries, I think, an artist when we just go into fusion. So, and it is not only about the other artist intruding in your space, it's also a fear of me. I don't want to intrude in his space. Just to take an example, you know, when I'm dancing and I'm playing Krishna, and in my mind, Krishna is there. Now imagine I'm dancing and the other artist walks into this space. There's nothing, but for me, my Krishna is standing there, you know, and he just bumps into my Krishna. It doesn't work. So I think this is the difficulty sometimes, you know, we face, or that was my apprehension at least. And this reminds me actually of a very beautiful line by Yeats. I would like to read it out to you. His full name is William Butler Yeats. So I'm reading out this poem. Had I the heavens embroidered cloths, enwrought with golden and silver light, the blue and the dim and the dark cloths of night and light and half light, I would spread the cloth under your feet. But I, being poor, have only my dreams. I have spread my dreams under your feet. Tread softly, because you tread on my dreams. So this is actually the line which came, this is the line which came to me because I felt it was like that. It was like, you know, tread softly because you tread on my dreams. I think both artists need to be very sensitive to each other's space and each other's world. And I'm very happy today having participated in this project because I think Manuel Weber is a very sensitive actor, and we actually had no problems in interacting in the same space and sharing space. So coming to other difficulties during this project, there was a major difficulty as a dancer which I faced, and that was to speak and dance at the same time, especially when the spoken language and the body language are culturally very different. So the first challenge for me in this project was not only to speak on stage while dancing, but to learn to speak with a perfect accent so as not to shock the ears of a Baroque audience. And the hardest part of it was to meet up to the diction of the Baroque actor Manuel Weber, who was right there sharing the stage with me. So despite the fact that I'm quite fluent in French and I have a PhD in French, I had to go through Sylvain. I think that's the first time you would hear that. I had to go through a ruthless training with 3 experts from this domain, and one of them being Sylvain himself. So they actually worked very hard. Thank you. So the second point of difficulty, which I think I faced in this fusion work in the field of acting, space, body language, gesture, etc., was that when in dance, you know, when we deal with a dialogue, the thing is, in dance, we consider a movement or any posture from very different angles. Like, you know, I can play the girl and then the girl, and I'll exploit her in every direction, from the side, from the back, from all angles. But when you are actually dealing with theater and you have a dialogue to deliver, The difficulty is that whenever you're delivering your dialogue, you have to look at your public. So you cannot just have fun turning around and doing postures in all different directions. And this was an obstacle I had to overcome, because it brought it brought my world shattering down. Because when we learn Indian dance, those of you who are into dance would know this, that we have a basic shloka, which says yato hastah tato drishti, yato drishti tato mana, yato mana tato bhava, yato bhava tato rasa. So that says that wherever the hand goes, the eyes must follow. Where the eyes go, your mind must connect. And where your mind connects, you have to put in your emotion. And that's when rasa is born. So this was very strange to me. I was like talking to Manuel, but I had to look at the audience. So it was very contradictory to what we had basically learned in dance. We want to talk to someone, we look at that person, because we don't have this problem of dealing with delivering a dialogue. So that was the second difficulty I faced. And I think there's one sequence which I really liked, which I think with Silva and with the whole team, we managed to really work out very well. And especially, I like to acknowledge the support of the musicians who supported us really a lot. So this was the first clip I wish to show you, where we learned where there's this dialogue throw and dance coming together. So Sagarji, could you please project the second clip, I think, for you.
Oh, cher perdrix, jusqu'à présent vos vertus m'étaient inconnues, ce qui était cause que je vous tenais dans l'indifférence. Mais mon bonheur a voulu aujourd'hui qu'ayant appris vos rares qualités, je n'ai pu m'empêcher de désirer votre entretien. Ô cruel tyran, laisse-moi vivre et me compte au nombre de celles que tu avais déjà mangées. Ne tâche pas en vain de vouloir accorder l'eau et le feu. Cher perdrix, je te prie d'ôter de ton esprit ces vaines craintes et de croire que je ne désire autre chose sinon d'avoir l'honneur de ta compagnie. Et si j'avais autre dessein, je ne m'amuserais pas à te vouloir faire sortir, car mes serres sont aussi fortes que jamais, et mon bec aussi aigu. J'en aurais déjà attrapé une douzaine depuis le temps qu'il y a que je te parle. Et rien ne m'amène ici que le bien de te voir.
So thank you. So this was an extract from one of the fables called The Falcon and the Partridge. And this fable is about the friendship between two birds, and one being a predator and the other being a very small and shy bird. And as we move on, the story lets you discover whether this friendship shall be a reliable one or not. So I wish someday you shall you shall be able to see the concert, and then you would discover for yourself. The second point which I would like to take up is that when we are working in with a text, the objective of an actor is not just simply to reiterate the text. So what we need to do in cases of fusion, when you are dealing with text, is we need to, I think, open spaces so that the body can speak and each of them can express the same text through the body language. So there's a second clip which I would like you to which I would like to share with you. It's in the same fable, The Falcon and the Partridge. So where you see that there's not much dialogue in this, we have opened a space within the text to be able to dialogue between the two actors through the body.
Le faucon répondit si à propos à toutes les raisons de la perdrix qu'elle fut contrainte de sortir. Ce qu'elle n'eut pas plutôt fait que le faucon l'embrasse. Il lui fait force caresses. L'ayant portée dans son nid, la faisait divertir du mieux qu'il pouvait.
Yes, thank you. So, and the last, there's one more clip I would like to share with you, is that even when we are, there are spaces in during this fusion work we did in the Zami, there were spaces where Manuel was alone, all alone by himself, and he had his space, or spaces where I, as a Kathak dancer, had my own space with my accompaniment in my world of sitar and tabla, etc. But I wish to say that when we are in a fusion work like this, what is very important is that even when you present, even when you're in your own world and you have your own vocabulary and your own technique, we always need to modify something and we need to adapt to the context. So I would like to put it maybe like this, that the technical content remains the same, but let's say the packaging would change, I think people who are in the advertising world, they would realize it very well. So it's like I serve the Bengan bharta in India and I put it in a karhai and, it goes along with all the other dishes. But maybe if I'm in France, I would choose to take it in a very fine piece of crockery from Limoges, and I would serve my bharta with a little bit of garnish. And it looks very different, although the dish is the same. So the next clip, which I would like to show to you is this. It's a very typically Kathak piece, which is, for those who understand, it is a sequence of 14 beats rhythm in Dhamar. But you'll see that it's still not in the Kathak form. There's something which I'm doing to depict. I'm using this Dhamar form, this technique, to translate the predator. So Sagarji, could you please show us the last clip? So with this, I would end my intervention and my reaction on this idea of fusion between two forms of art. And I'd like to end on this note, just saying that to me, after all that we've said and seen, fusion is not just a juxtaposition of two forms of art, which we many times can see. And it is actually a space where two artists or two art forms, or even many other art forms, grow together, where we help each other to express ourselves better. And as Sylvain put it very beautifully, it's like a marriage which brings out like a third entity, a third being, which is this child. And you find neither the Baroque language nor the Kathak, but together it knits up to something new and a third new language probably. So with this, I think I'll let Sylvain take it up again.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I would like to say that if there is one portion of the show which is fused, it's Maitreji's portion, because he does combine French language of 17th century, which is quite a high-level language, with Indian gestures from Kathak. And we try to have something whole with that, and I think it worked to me very beautifully. So now we have a few questions and answers. So let me see. Yes, there is one for Jean-Luc. Jean-Luc, India has a rich history of music instruments which is disappearing. How do you think we can bring them back?
So it's a very interesting question and a very large question. I would just like to speak about my job, playing the lute. Of course, the lute was part of many instruments that disappeared in Europe because of industrialization. And so we have musicians, musicologists, had to discover again these instruments in museums, try to learn again how to play them. We have read a lot of treatises from the 16th century, and so it's kind of reconstruction. But perhaps India could do better. That would be not to lose this, because we have lost, and so we have recreated what had lost. I think that musicians have to be aware that their instrument or their music is, of course, their own. Their own heritage, but also the heritage of all Indian people, and moreover of all humanity. It's what we call patrimoine de l'humanité, patrimony of humanity. The UNESCO has a very good conception about that. That means all the differences of humanities must be preserved, and the instruments like that. I think it's the responsibilities of musicians not to go to the simple way that to play one instrument for all music. Have to play different instruments for different music. Have to be very aware that it's not only your business; it's the business of all people, and we are responsible for patrimony, which is much more larger than what we deal with. That's my answer.
Great. There are many nice questions. And unfortunately, we cannot answer all of them, because we have to be frank, to squeeze into the time which we are already lucky to share. And there is one for me asking how I started the journey of exploring Indian classical music and instruments. Yeah, actually, I was studying Western classical music, guitar, and composition, and something was missing to my sensitivity. There was something missing. I liked the idea of exploring a note. I liked to know what a note. I studied how you write for an orchestra, so to combine many notes. I studied harmony, how you combine also many notes, how you combine many instruments. But nobody taught me in France what is one note. And I thought I would not like to combine many notes before I know what is one note. So that thing I needed to go to India for. And there I can tell you it was a great adventure, and a very humbling adventure, to know that I could combine many notes I had learned, but to do one note or two in the right way, with the right flow, I was not able to do that. So that's my answer. And because we have to answer quite shortly, and I would like to give one question to Maitreji. There is one about, there are several ones, so we have to pick one up. So there is one that speaks about purity, impurity, infusion in dance, and asks you, Maitri, what your opinion is. Yeah, I don't find it because now it has. We have many.
I could answer that if you
Yeah.
wish.
Okay.
So about purity or impurity, actually, I think it's a very personal question, and that is, if in a certain act, in a certain point of time, according to the movement you do, you feel I have completely lost myself into the other form of art, or I'm just overshadowed by the other form of art with which I am trying to fuse, then of course you're not into the purity of Kathak and you've lost your purity. But in the same situation, if in every situation of fusion where you feel that I am myself, I am entirely in my Kathak form, I don't feel disturbed, but I'm expanding with that form. I could go out of my limits, but I still feel that I'm into Kathak. Well, then I'm in my purity, and that's it.
Thank you to our panelists for such an exciting and wonderful presentation, demonstration. I was just messaging with Sagar on the and saying that, you know, we should have made this into a masterclass. There's so much more ground to cover. But a special thank you to Sylvain, I mean, for so skillfully putting this together. I have to thank some of our audience members, Gayatri Bhatia, who actually introduced us indirectly to him. And I remember meeting him at the Opera House maybe 2 or 3 years ago. And we said, we must do something. And I don't know how, I just remembered him, and Sagar put this evening together. But thank you all. I mean, this was a wonderful experience. And also to our partners, the Indian Music Experience Museum, the Alliance Française, Furtado's, and the Royal Opera House. And obviously to our to our audiences for tuning in. You please stay tuned. There is a short visual performance by Sylvain and Jean-Luc. You know, I have to do my avid plug before we go into the performance. So we have many interesting programs planned. Our next one is next Thursday, which looks at urban legacies, the Portuguese heritage of Bombay. And followed by, we have another episode from this series, will be our third, which looks at the universal language of music with Ayan Ali Bangarsh, Sharon Isbin, and they'll be in conversation with Amit Gurbaksani. For more, just stalk us on social media, go onto our website. I think Maitri is going to tell you a little more until Sylvain and Jean-Luc take it away. Maitri, am I correct?
Well, so, I also take this little pause to salute everyone from the team and thank you all again. I'm very happy because thanks to Avid Learning, we could actually connect up together after this whole long phase of COVID. So I was very happy to see Jean-Luc and Sylvain on the other end. And your discussion and your invitation has given us the longing to take up again this concert. And with this, I leave you with Sylvain and
I think
Jean-Luc.
we need to have you all back at the Opera House. That would be the main thing.
That would be wonderful. Yeah. We'd be very happy.
Excellent. All right, they're together. Wonderful.
Yeah, we'll be happy to show the Bridge of Cultures from the other side of the bridge.
Yeah, we're going to ask our partners at the Alliance Française to make this happen. You know, Sharon and Stefan and Siddharth, they've been they all names start with S, so it's very easy. But they've been so gracious and helpful and encouraging to actually collaborate to bring more and more performances to the Opera House. So yeah, we're going to put it on their shoulders. So it'll happen.
Wonderful.
Over to you guys.
So what we're going to play at first is you are going to hear two kinds of improvisations, Indian improvisations of Alap and Prelude non mesuré, which is the equivalent of improvisation without rhythm, without pulsation. I mean,
Beat.
a beat without beat. And after that, so we're going to exchange some phrases, musical phrases, each with our own language, and then we're going to play a pasakai, which is an improvised structure for dancing, which was mainly used for dancing, but in which we are going to mix sobar and theorbo.
Yeah, and just for precision, the prelude as well as pasakai are baroque forms which are improvised. And so, yes, Western classical music does have improvised forms. And so the more we look at things, the more we find, bridges between our cultures. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you.